14 elite nannies quit in 6 months. Some left in tears. One left in an ambulance. Victoria Kensington had ruthlessly conquered Wall Street, but she couldn't control her own 7-year-old twins. They were untouchable monsters, until a quiet nighttime janitor accidentally revealed his devastating secret and broke every rule. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the opulent, mahogany-paneled penthouse office of Kensington Media Group. It was 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Beatrice, a seasoned British governess who had once wrangled the children of literal royalty, was running toward the glass elevators, weeping hysterically. Clutched in her trembling hands was the ruined remains of a $12,000 Hermes handbag, now dripping with purple industrial-strength slime. Victoria Kensington did not look up from her Bloomberg terminal. At 34, she was the youngest female media mogul in the hemisphere, a billionaire who could tank a competitor's stock with a single, perfectly manicured tweet. She possessed a mind like a steel trap and a heart, as her ex-husband bitterly claimed during their highly publicized divorce, made of absolute zero ice. But as Beatrice's sobs faded into the elevator shaft, Victoria pinched the bridge of her nose, a rare crack in her porcelain facade. That was nanny number 15. Gone. "Cancel my 10 o'clock, Victoria said to her trembling assistant, Clara, who was hovering near the doorway with a tablet. "And call the agency. Tell them I need a replacement by noon, and I'm doubling the salary. Again." Clara swallowed hard. "Miss Kensington, the agency dropped us. They said Chloe and Harper are uninsurable." Victoria finally looked up, her piercing blue eyes narrowing. Her 7-year-old twin daughters, Chloe and Harper, were not merely mischievous. They were calculating, strategic, and entirely devoid of fear. Since their father, a disgraced European shipping heir, had abandoned them for a life of endless partying in Ibiza, the girls had waged a relentless, scorched-earth war against any authority figure who dared step foot in their penthouse. They had hacked a smart home security system to trap a tutor in a panic room for 6 hours. They had slipped severe laxatives into a private chef's truffle risotto. They were brilliant, broken, and entirely out of control. Down the hall, completely removed from the corporate melodrama, Nathaniel Hayes quietly pushed his industrial mop bucket over the imported Italian marble floors. Nate was 32, with the broad shoulders of a former athlete and the tired, haunted eyes of a man who had seen too much. He wore the standard grey jumpsuit of the Kensington Tower maintenance staff, a nameless ghost in a building full of titans. No one on the executive floor knew that Nate wasn't just a janitor. 5 years ago, he had been Dr. Nathaniel Hayes, one of the most sought-after pediatric behavioral specialists on the East Coast. He had a gift for reaching children that the world had written off. But then his wife, Sarah, was killed in a drunk driving accident, leaving him alone with their newborn son, Leo. When Leo was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive autoimmune disorder, Nate's world collapsed. The medical bills devoured his savings, his practice, and his home. Desperate, he took a unionized janitorial job at Kensington Tower, simply because it offered the most robust, ironclad platinum health insurance policy in the state, the only thing keeping his son alive. Nate kept his head down. He scrubbed the floors, emptied the trash of billionaires, and rushed home to his son every morning. He had seen the twins before, of course. He had watched them terrorize the lobby, their angelic blonde curls bouncing as they unleashed hell on the security staff. He had recognized the signs immediately. They weren't malicious. They were drowning in grief and testing the boundaries of a world that felt incredibly unstable. But it wasn't his place to intervene. He had his own child to save. Until the day of the Meridian Tech merger. It was the most critical day of Victoria Kensington's career. A $4.2 billion acquisition was on the table. The board of directors, along with the intensely traditional CEO of Meridian, Richard Sterling Hughes, were gathered in the glass-walled Apex boardroom on the 64th floor. Because Oak Ridge Academy had officially expelled the twins that morning, after they managed to superglue the principal's antique mahogany desk to the ceiling, Victoria had no choice but to bring them to the office. She had confined them to her private suite with 2 security guards and strict orders not to let them out of their sight. But Chloe and Harper were master escape artists. At exactly 11:45 a.m., right as Victoria was handing Richard the final binding contracts, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom burst open. "Fire in the hole!" Harper shrieked. Chloe hurled a meticulously engineered, pressurized canister of aerosolized glitter and liquid soap directly into the center of the custom oak conference table. It detonated with a wet pop, coating the multi-billion-dollar contracts, the catered caviar, and Richard Sterling Hughes's bespoke Tom Ford suit in a shimmering, soapy sludge. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Security guards lunged, but the twins were already moving, executing a tactical disruption that would have impressed a Navy SEAL. Chloe leapt onto the leather chairs, knocking over carafes of hot coffee, while Harper grabbed a red permanent marker and began drawing jagged, anarchic spirals across the panoramic glass windows. Victoria stood frozen, humiliated, watching her empire teeter on the edge of collapse. Richard Sterling Hughes was turning purple, wiping glitter from his eyes, his mouth open in outrage. "Miss Kensington!" Richard bellowed over the screaming girls. "If this is how you manage your own household, how can you possibly manage my company?" Security couldn't touch the girls. No one wanted to risk a multi-million-dollar lawsuit by physically restraining the billionaire's heirs. The guards merely hovered uselessly, pleading. Victoria took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Chloe, Harper, stop this instantly." They ignored her. They always ignored her. Outside in the corridor, Nate was emptying the recycling bins when he heard the commotion. He walked toward the glass walls of the boardroom, his mop still in hand, and took in the scene. He saw the ruined contracts. He saw the furious executives. But mostly, he saw Victoria Kensington, the Iron Queen of Wall Street, looking utterly broken, staring at her daughters with a heartbreaking mixture of rage and profound failure. Nate sighed, setting his jaw. He knew he should walk away. He needed this job. He needed the insurance. But the behavioral specialist in him, the father in him, couldn't watch a child self-destruct. He pushed open the boardroom doors. The moment Nate stepped into the room, a hush began to ripple through the lower-level executives near the door, simply because his presence was so jarring. A janitor in a stained grey jumpsuit was the last thing anyone expected in the Apex boardroom during a corporate meltdown. "Hey, get out of here!" one of the security guards barked, waving a hand at Nate. "We have a situation." Nate ignored the guard. He didn't look at Victoria, and he didn't look at the furious CEO of Meridian Tech. His eyes locked entirely onto Chloe and Harper. Harper was currently winding up to throw a heavy crystal paperweight through the floor-to-ceiling window, a drop of 64 stories. Nate didn't yell. He didn't issue a command. Yelling was a reaction, and these girls fed on reactions. Instead, Nate walked calmly to the center of the room, right into the puddle of soapy glitter. He dropped his mop, letting it clatter loudly against the wood floor. The sound was sharp enough to make Harper pause, the paperweight still raised above her head. Slowly, deliberately, Nate reached into his jumpsuit pocket. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden puzzle block, a sensory toy he always carried for his son, Leo. He sat cross-legged right there on the boardroom floor, in the middle of the mess, completely ignoring the screaming children, the stunned executives, and the billionaire CEO. He began to twist the wooden blocks. Click, clack, click. The rhythmic, mechanical sound cut through the ambient panic of the room. He didn't look up. He just kept working the puzzle, his face a mask of absolute serenity. Chloe, who was about to dump a tray of pastries onto a laptop, stopped. She looked at her sister. Harper slowly lowered the paperweight. The twins had been screamed at, bribed, threatened, and chased. But they had never, ever been ignored in the middle of a tantrum. It violated the fundamental rules of their game. Curiosity, the ultimate kryptonite of a brilliant child, took over. Slowly, cautiously, the girls descended from the furniture. They crept toward Nate, eyeing him like feral cats evaluating a strange new object. They stood right in front of him. Nate didn't acknowledge them. He just kept twisting the puzzle. Click, clack. "What is that?" Chloe finally demanded, her voice dripping with artificial haughtiness. Nate didn't answer. He carefully balanced a red piece against a blue piece. "Hey, mop boy!" Harper snapped, kicking at his boot. "She asked you a question." Nate stopped. He didn't look angry. He looked up, making direct, piercing eye contact with Harper. It wasn't the look of a subordinate. It was the look of an immovable object. "It's a locking mechanism," Nate said, his voice deep, calm, and perfectly modulated. "But it only opens for people who know how to stand completely still for 10 seconds, which unfortunately means neither of you will ever see what's inside." It was a brilliant psychological trap. He had challenged their competence while simultaneously giving them a clear, actionable boundary. Chloe's eyes narrowed. "I can stand still for an hour." "Prove it," Nate whispered. 10 seconds. Not a muscle. Instantly, both girls froze. Their chaotic energy evaporated, replaced by intense, laser-focused determination to prove this stranger wrong. The entire boardroom watched in stunned, breathless silence as the two terrors of Kensington Tower stood like statues. Nate counted out loud, his voice a soothing rhythm. 8, 9, 10. He clicked the final piece of the puzzle, and a small hidden drawer popped open, revealing a shiny, polished stone. The girls gasped, dropping to their knees to look at it. "Now," Nate said quietly, leaning in so only they could hear, "this room is for boring adults. You two are far too smart to be wasting your time covering boring paper in glitter. Let's go to the break room. I have a chemical compound that dissolves superglue, and I need 2 lab assistants." Chloe and Harper looked at each other. A janitor offering them a science experiment involving chemicals? It was an offer they couldn't refuse. Without a single word, the 2 girls stood up, grabbed Nate's massive hands, and allowed themselves to be led peacefully out of the boardroom. The heavy doors clicked shut behind them. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Richard Sterling Hughes stared at the door, completely bewildered. He looked down at his ruined suit, then up at Victoria. He suddenly let out a booming, echoing laugh. "I have to say, Victoria," Richard chuckled, wiping soap from his cheek, "if you can hire staff that handles a crisis with that kind of tactical precision, maybe I am trusting the right company with my tech." The merger was saved. 3 hours later, Nate was summoned to the penthouse office. He walked in, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Chloe and Harper were sitting at a small table in the corner, quietly and meticulously building a structural bridge out of toothpicks and marshmallows Nate had procured from the cafeteria. They didn't even look up to cause trouble. Victoria was standing by the window,